Howdy, film students at Shasta College Humanities 4. How y'all doing? Well, we're creeping up on Halloween. You know what that means? That's right, folks. Coming soon to a screening near you. Night of terror and horror. Something wicked this way comes. We'll be doing horror films. A deep dive next week. Happy Halloween! But before that, we're still in the era of the 1970s. It's due tomorrow by midnight. Hope you all understand it. If you don't, text me, write me. I'll help explain. If you listen to my last lecture, I give you all the answers. Plus, if you watch the documentary, all the answers are there. Think about them. Give me some good explanations. Don't not just one or two line sentences. And please, nobody say any answer, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Please don't use that because that's an easy way out and it's has nothing to do with anything. All right. Other than that, keep up on your journals. You know what they look like. Each week, you're keeping a journal of what we're doing here each week. And this week will be Blaxploitation. That's what they call it. I didn't make the word up. Google it. It's in your Wikipedia, it's everywhere. Watch the documentary. I'll post it in modules after I talk here. And do give it a good perusal. That means in depth look, by the way. And there was a time, a moment in Hollywood history when Black directors, Black filmmakers, Black actors, Black performers, Black writers had a chance to get into the Hollywood system and make their own films. There's a brief moment in time. Um, the revolution was started with two films, one by Melvin Van Peebles, the other one by Gordon Parks. Each of them sparked a revolution that took Hollywood by surprise because they're not good at foresight there. They're only good at hindsight and they're good at exploiting things. That's why it's called exploitation. Folks, the Black filmmakers didn't call it that. Hollywood did. But what happened was Black audiences weren't seeing themselves up on the screen. All the films I showed you in the Easy Rider, Raging Bulls documentary, there's no African American faces, there's no Asian faces. That was a very white era of artists and auteur filmmakers coming out of film schools and making those films. Well, a couple of Black filmmakers thought there could be a market there if they could get their films out into the marketplace. So they made a couple films on the cheap for the inner city audience. Black audiences didn't see themselves represented on the screen. And they saw an opportunity to correct this. And so Mario's his son, Melvin, who just died this year, but he was pretty old, 92 or something, made this film called Sweet Badass. It's a long title. He made it for low six figures. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Starred himself because he thought of himself as quite the good-looking dude, and he made up this story about a sex worker. Yes, folks, he performs live sex acts with hot women because they can't get enough of his sweet black ass. I'm just quoting the film, folks. But in the midst of it, he gets involved with some corrupt cops and they want to take him down. And the rest of the movie, he's being pursued by these corrupt white cops, and he has to outfox them and outrun them. And he does do that. And like in the documentary you're going to watch, he gets away. That doesn't happen in most films. The bad guy always dies. So he wasn't the bad guy, really. He was wrongly accused. He was a black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Does that sound familiar? Just look at the news. Happens every day in this country. Wrong place at the wrong time, wrong traffic stop. A white cop will harass the hell out of you or shoot you. This happens every day in America, folks. So we're not out of that mire yet. And the country is so divided that we're not going to come out of there for a long time. I don't believe. So he made this movie and he released it to inner cities in Detroit, Chicago, New York, and it took off. And what surprised the Hollywood people, it wasn't just inner city black audiences, white audiences were showing up. Film students had heard about these films and they started showing up for these screenings. Hollywood paid attention. They saw something they could exploit there. There's a white audience that needs to see these stories also. The other film was more of a commercially, I guess you'd call conservative kind of film. It wasn't very radical, but it did star a black detective called Shaft, and Gordon Parks, who was had been a photographer, got to helm this film, and it was written for a white guy, kind of a detective James Bond type of dude, and um, he saw some room for change, and so they cast a black actor, Richard Roundtree, suave and handsome and quick with a gun and with the ladies, of course, and they put a great soundtrack to it. Um, Isaac Hayes was a musician who later became an actor, and won the best song for Academy Award for the best song. Shaft. Who are you gonna call? Shaft. He's the coolest of all. Shaft. Yes, Shaft is a not so subtle reference to the male member. Absolutely. All these movies have a huge sexual vibe to them. How studly these dudes are, and the ladies love them. And that film went on to be a huge hit with white audiences and black audiences, and Hollywood definitely was now paying attention. And they wanted to continue that. And so other filmmakers got a chance to make films. And yet they did. For the next 5 years, there were some really outstanding films like Superfly and Coffee Brown with the great Pam Grier. Look at the documentary I'm going to show you. It's all in there. I hope you want to go watch one of these films. They're out there, they're everywhere. YouTube, yeah, you might have to pay a couple bucks for them, but they're definitely worth it because they have a different take on things. It's not just the white person's take, and usually the white people in these movies are the bad guys, and but you always end up rooting for Superfly, who was a drug dealer in the movie and hip dude with great clothes and great chicks and great cars, and he wants to do one more drug score and get out, and he's having a hard time doing that. Pursued once again by crooked cops who want part of his stash. And how does he rid himself of that? Stars the great Ron O'Neal, who was a classical trained actor, and he does a great job in it. You'll see if you watch the documentary. I hope you do. I'll post it right after I post this. That's in there. Then they got another great musician Curtis Mayfield to do the soundtrack, Superfly. And it was a huge hit. It was all over the radio. This would be in the 1970s. And the music made the film, and the film made the music more popular than ever before. In the film, he's a pimp and a drug dealer, and yet he's the hero of the piece because he's a thinking man trying to make the best of his situation in a corrupt world. Coffee Brown was getting revenge on her daughter who was given a shot of heroin and it killed her. And so she spends the next 2 hours getting revenge on not just white guys, but black guys also who were drug dealers. And she does not take any, doesn't suffer fools weakly. She's a kick ass woman, played by the great Pam Grier. All of a sudden, now there's a woman hero in the inner city. Many films followed with Pam Grier and other actors, and they all did well at the box office. Then they branched out into karate. They would have Bruce Lee, they would team him up with some black actors, and they'd have a cross pollinated kung fu action black party Black Panther movie, and these were all successful. People like Quentin Tarantino ate these things up. He loved them. He's still trying to make. If you see his movie called Jackie Brown, he's copying the Blaxploitation films. Absolutely, and he admits to it. Um, in LA, when I lived there, they showed these films downtown LA. That's where the lowest rent theaters were. They went to Hollywood theaters. That was in West Hollywood and West LA. Santa Monica was not downtown LA, which was pretty crappy when I lived there. Now it's all gentrified and fancy. And you'd go see these films down there in this old theaters on Broadway or Figueroa, if you know downtown LA at all. This went on in San Francisco and Seattle, Portland. These films found an audience. Hollywood came calling, and like so many things that they get their hands involved in, they started changing the formula. They started getting white directors to direct these films. That wasn't the smart thing to do. They are losing their voice with the black audience because now it's coming from a white perspective. And then they started making exploitation films like Blackula, which is kind of a joke, but still worth watching about a black Dracula, folks. Uh, they had Black Caesar with Fred, um, and former football player. They got a lot of sports figures to be in these movies. Uh, they were heroes in the movies, and they didn't die in the movie, and that was the key to it. Because in most films made by white people, the black person is going to die because they're the bad guy usually. These guys in these movies were the heroes. Hollywood screwed that up. And so after about 4 or 5 years of successful blaxploitation movies, it came to a sudden dead end. Black audiences turned their back on it. It's not what they signed up for because it had been corrupted by Hollywood's version of black filmmaking. But for a few important years in cinema, when things seemed to be really opened in Hollywood, black films had a foot in the door. It slammed closed on them. It didn't really open until in the late 80s when Spike Lee and John Singleton started making films. We'll be talking about that when I get into that decade. Not yet. It took a while for it to come back. And by then, it wasn't exploitation films. They weren't black pimps and drug dealers. They're just ordinary folks, folks. who didn't have to have white skin. Um, Maybe you saw some Spike Lee movies or the John Singleton movie or others. We'll talk about those at a later date. But right now, and so far, no women. Sorry, folks. I'll be talking about women directors soon. They're still having trouble getting their foot in the door, although it's a lot better than it was. But here we have the open-minded 60s and the groovy 70s where people are grooving to great music and equality supposedly through the sexes, but it wasn't equal, folks. There was no women directors in Hollywood. A couple that had gone in there, nobody really knew about. We're going to do a whole segment on women filmmakers next week, and you'll see how important they were. And they started in the silent films, folks. They just were in the background. A lot of people didn't think women could direct a film. It was a man's job. So Blaxploitation, the era came to an end. This is at the height of the Vietnam War. That's what's going on socially. Blacks were being drafted and killed in Vietnam a lot more than white kids were, because usually they took poor ghetto kids who couldn't afford to go to college, couldn't hide in college where white kids were hiding in college. They used to have student deferments, and they sent them off to the Vietnam War. That's the threat. Besides from white police, white bigots, white racists, civil rights was going on at the time. Nixon's in the White House, never a good sign. And civil rights movement had happened. A lot of civil rights got passed. Jim Crow was coming to an end. Still, black assassinations, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. Half the Black Panthers were in prison by now. Their political movement was short-lived. Scared the white people. Scared them, and Hollywood shut the door on them. By the late 1970s, there was no black filmmakers getting anything done. Because Hollywood is short-sighted, folks. They see the money, they exploit the money. Once they start to understand it, they take it over. But like the era in the Hollywood, the quiz you're taking right now, that's what destroyed the era. Was that the Hollywood filmmakers, the auteur filmmakers, lost control of their films when the studios took back control to make big budget B movies like Jaws, Star Wars, and all the endless sequels. And they didn't need the smart, uptight, upright, politically ambitious filmmakers telling them what to do. They now were going to tell the filmmakers what to do. That's one of the answers in your quiz, folks. And on that happy note, I'm going to post this. Don't forget the quiz. Also, I'm going to sign an essay tomorrow. It'll be due next week. It's going to be one of these movies that I've been talking about lately. It's in the documentaries. I'll choose one or two of them. You could take a choice. Do another essay. Then we'll tackle women next week and horror films because of Halloween celebration. Good luck on the papers. Enjoy the documentaries on Blaxploitation films. I'll see you next week with the story of film continues.